What if I told you that Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, discovered something so controversial about women that it's been hidden from mainstream relationship advice for over a century? Something so powerful that understanding it could completely transform how you see attraction, love, and the mysterious forces that drive female behavior in relationships. Jung called it the anima. But what he really uncovered was far darker and more complex than most people realize. He discovered that every woman carries within her a shadow self, a hidden psychological force that can either create the deepest love or the most devastating heartbreak you'll ever experience. If you're tired of surface-level dating advice and want to understand the real psychological forces behind attraction and relationships, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. Because what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about women and love. Most men spend their entire lives confused about women. They read dating books, watch pickup videos, try different techniques, but they never understand the fundamental truth that Jung discovered through decades of analyzing the human psyche. They never learn about the shadow feminine, the part of every woman that she herself doesn't fully understand. See, Jung wasn't just a therapist, sitting in his office taking notes. He was a revolutionary who dared to explore the darkest corners of human consciousness. And what he found about women's psychology was so profound, so unsettling, that even today, most people can't handle the truth. The shadow feminine isn't evil, it's primal. It's the raw, unfiltered essence of female psychology that has been shaped by millions of years of evolution. It's the part of her that can love you so deeply it feels like drowning, or reject you so completely it feels like death. Jung discovered that this shadow operates through 4 distinct psychological patterns, and once you understand these patterns, you'll never look at your relationships the same way again. You'll start to see the hidden motivations behind her actions, the real reasons she says one thing but does another, and why she can seem like a completely different person from one moment to the next. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will blow your mind. Jung found that most men are completely blind to these patterns because they're too focused on what women say rather than understanding the psychological forces driving their behavior. The first shadow pattern Jung identified is what he called the devouring mother. Now, before you think this is about actual mothers, understand that this is a psychological archetype that lives inside every woman's psyche. It's the part of her that can love so intensely that it becomes possessive, controlling, and ultimately destructive. When a woman operates from this shadow pattern, she doesn't just want to be with you, she wants to consume you entirely. She wants to know where you are every moment, who you're talking to, what you're thinking. She'll create drama to test your devotion, push boundaries to see how much control she can gain, and slowly erode your independence until you feel like you're suffocating. But here's the twist that Jung discovered. This isn't coming from a place of evil or manipulation. It's coming from a primal fear of abandonment so deep that it overrides her rational mind. The devouring mother shadow emerges when a woman's deepest insecurities are triggered, when she feels that losing you would mean losing herself. Most men, when they encounter this pattern, either run away in fear or submit completely. But Jung found that there's a third option, one that can actually transform this destructive pattern into the deepest form of love possible. It requires understanding that behind every devouring behavior is a wounded woman desperately trying to feel safe and loved. The key is learning to set boundaries without abandoning her, to show strength without being cruel, and to demonstrate that you can handle her intensity without being consumed by it. When you master this balance, something magical happens. The devouring mother transforms into the nurturing lover, a woman who can give and receive love without fear. But Jung didn't stop there. he discovered a second shadow pattern that's even more complex and potentially more dangerous: the seductive destroyer. This is the part of the feminine psyche that can attract and seduce with devastating effectiveness, but always with a hidden agenda of power and control. When a woman operates from this shadow, she becomes irresistible. She knows exactly what to say, how to move, what to wear, and how to make you feel like you're the most important man in the world. But underneath this seduction is a deeper game. She's not trying to win your love, she's trying to win your power. The seductive destroyer feeds on male attention and validation, but she can never get enough. She'll make you feel like a king one day and completely ignore you the next. She'll build up your ego just to tear it down. She'll make you believe you're special while keeping multiple options open. Jung discovered that this pattern often emerges in women who have been hurt deeply by men in their past. The seduction becomes a form of revenge, not against you personally, but against the masculine principle that wounded her. She's trying to regain her power by taking yours. Now here's something that will completely change how you see those hot and cold women you've encountered. This push-pull behavior isn't random. It's a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism that Jung traced back to childhood trauma and societal conditioning. The woman operating from the seductive destroyer pattern is simultaneously attracted to strong men and terrified of them. She needs to feel powerful enough to leave before she can be left. She needs to feel in control before she can surrender to love. This creates the maddening cycle of intense attraction followed by sudden withdrawal that drives so many men crazy. Most dating advice tells you to play games back, to become equally hot and cold, to try to outmanipulate the manipulator. But Jung's approach was far more sophisticated. He understood that trying to beat the seductive destroyer at her own game only validates her worldview that all relationships are about power and control. Instead, Jung advocated for what he called conscious engagement, recognizing the pattern, understanding its origins, and responding from a place of strength rather than reaction. This means not falling for the seduction trap, not chasing when she withdraws, and not trying to fix or save her from her own patterns. When you respond to the seductive destroyer with calm, consistent strength, when you can appreciate her beauty and magnetism without being enslaved by it, something remarkable happens. The game loses its power. She begins to feel safe enough to drop the mask and show you the real woman underneath. But this transformation requires something that most men aren't willing to give: time, patience, and the willingness to walk away if she can't or won't do the inner work necessary to heal these patterns. You cannot love someone out of their shadow. They have to choose to face it themselves. The third shadow pattern Jung identified is perhaps the most heartbreaking: the eternal victim. This is the part of the feminine psyche that has been so wounded by life that it can only relate to the world through suffering and martyrdom. A woman operating from this shadow pattern will always find something to be hurt about, something to blame on others, some reason why she can't be happy or successful in love. She'll attract men who either want to save her or men who will confirm her belief that all men are harmful. But here's what's truly tragic about the eternal victim pattern, and this insight from Jung will break your heart. Underneath all that suffering is a woman who has forgotten that she has any power to change her circumstances. The eternal victim isn't choosing to suffer because she enjoys it. She's suffering because it's the only way she learned to get attention, care, and love. Somewhere in her past, she discovered that being hurt or sick or helpless was the only way to get her needs met. This pattern became so deeply ingrained that she can't imagine being loved for her strength, her joy, or her success. Jung found that men typically respond to the eternal victim in one of two ways. They either become obsessed with trying to save her, or they become frustrated and abandon her. Both responses actually reinforce the pattern. The savior confirms that she needs to be rescued, while the abandoner confirms that she's unlovable. The conscious response, according to Jung, is to see through the victim story to the powerful woman. Underneath, it's to refuse to participate in the drama while still showing compassion for her pain. It's to hold space for her healing without taking responsibility for it. This is incredibly difficult because the eternal victim is often genuinely suffering, and your natural instinct is to want to help. But Jung discovered that true healing only happens when someone takes responsibility for their own life and choices. Your job isn't to save her, it's to model what healthy self-responsibility looks like. When a woman begins to heal from the eternal victim pattern, she transforms into what Jung called the wise woman, someone who has integrated her pain into wisdom, who can support others without losing herself, and who understands that true strength comes from taking responsibility for your own happiness. The fourth and final shadow pattern Jung identified is the most dangerous because it's the most hidden, the false light. This is the part of the feminine psyche that appears to be spiritually evolved, emotionally mature, and psychologically healthy, but is actually using these qualities as a sophisticated form of manipulation and control. The false light is the shadow wearing a mask of enlightenment. She talks about love and healing and growth, but underneath she's still operating from the same fear-based patterns as the other shadows. She's just gotten better at hiding them. A woman operating from the false light pattern might be a therapist, a spiritual teacher, a life coach, or just someone who presents herself as having done the work. She uses psychological language to justify her behavior, spiritual concepts to avoid accountability, and emotional intelligence to manipulate situations to her advantage. This is the most confusing shadow pattern because everything she says sounds healthy and evolved. She'll tell you about boundaries while violating yours. She'll talk about authentic communication while manipulating conversations to her advantage. She'll speak about love and healing while punishing you for not meeting her hidden expectations. Jung discovered that the false light often emerges in highly intelligent, educated women who have learned to use psychological and spiritual concepts as weapons rather than tools for genuine growth. They figured out how to get their needs met by appearing to be the most evolved person in the room. The scary part about the false light, and this will make you question every spiritually evolved woman you've ever met, is that she often believes her own performance. She's convinced herself that her manipulations are actually healing, that her control is actually love, and that her judgments are actually wisdom. The false light is terrified of being seen as anything other than perfect, so she projects all her darkness onto others. If there's conflict in the relationship, it's your fault for not being evolved enough. If there's drama, it's because you're triggering her trauma. If there's distance, it's because you're not spiritual enough to handle her depth. Jung found that the false light pattern often develops in women who were praised for being good girls and punished for showing any negative emotions. They learned to suppress their shadow so completely that it began operating unconsciously, wreaking havoc while they maintained their image of perfection. The challenge with the false light is that confronting it directly often triggers a spiritual or psychological superiority response. She'll use her knowledge of psychology to pathologize your concerns, or her spiritual practice to claim that you're operating from a lower vibration. Jung's approach to the false light required what he called fierce compassion, the willingness to see through the performance to the terrified woman underneath while refusing to enable the manipulation. It means appreciating her genuine insights while not being gaslit by her false ones. This pattern is particularly dangerous because it can destroy relationships while making you feel like you're the problem. The false light will have you questioning your own perceptions, your own sanity, your own spiritual development. She'll make you feel like you're lucky to be with someone so evolved while slowly eroding your sense of self. Jung discovered that healing the false light pattern requires a woman to face her own shadow honestly, to admit that she's not as evolved as she pretends to be, that she has the same fears and insecurities as everyone else, and that true growth comes from integration, not perfection. When the false light is healed, it transforms into the authentic self, a woman who can be genuinely loving without needing to prove it, truly wise without needing to display it, and deeply spiritual without using it as a weapon. Now, you might be wondering, how do you recognize these patterns? How do you know which shadow you're dealing with? And most importantly, how do you respond in a way that doesn't trigger more shadow behavior? Here's where Jung's insights become practical, and this is the part that will completely change how you navigate relationships. Jung discovered that these shadow patterns don't operate in isolation. Most women will cycle through different patterns depending on their stress levels, their hormonal cycles, their life circumstances, and how triggered they feel in the relationship. The key insight Jung had was that these shadows are not the woman's true self. They're protective mechanisms that develop to help her survive difficult circumstances. When a woman feels truly safe, loved, and seen, these patterns naturally begin to dissolve. But here's the catch. You can't create that safety by walking on eggshells or trying to avoid triggering her shadows. Jung found that trying to manage someone else's psychological patterns actually makes them worse. Instead, the safety comes from your own psychological stability, your ability to remain centered when she's operating from shadow, and your commitment to truth over comfort. This means developing what Jung called differentiation, the ability to love someone without losing yourself, to care without becoming codependent, and to stay present without becoming reactive. When you can remain calm and centered while she's in shadow mode, you create a container for her healing. Jung also discovered that men often trigger specific shadow patterns based on their own unhealed wounds. If you're operating from fear, you'll likely activate the devouring mother. If you're operating from weakness, you'll activate the seductive destroyer. If you're operating from savior complex, you'll activate the eternal victim. If you're operating from spiritual ego, you'll activate the false light. This is why Jung emphasized that relationship healing is always mutual. You can't heal someone else's shadows without facing your own. You can't create healthy relationship dynamics while operating from unhealthy internal patterns. The practical application of Jung's insights requires developing what he called shadow work. The process of becoming conscious of your own unconscious patterns and learning to integrate them in healthy ways. This isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware. When you understand your own shadows, you stop taking other people's shadows personally. When she's operating from the devouring mother, you recognize it as her fear of abandonment rather than proof that she doesn't trust you. When she's in seductive destroyer mode, you see it as her attempt to feel powerful rather than evidence that she doesn't love you. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of reacting to her shadow behaviors, you can respond to the wounded woman underneath. Instead of trying to fix or change her, you can model what healthy integration looks like. Instead of being triggered by her patterns, you can remain present and loving while maintaining your boundaries. Jung found that when one person in a relationship commits to conscious awareness and healthy integration, it creates a field of possibility for the other person to heal as well. But this isn't guaranteed. Healing is always a choice, and some people aren't ready or willing to do the work required. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of discernment in relationships. You can Love someone and still recognize that they're not ready for the kind of conscious relationship you want. You can have compassion for someone's wounds while choosing not to sacrifice your own well-being to their healing process. The goal isn't to become someone who can handle any level of dysfunction. It's to become someone who attracts and is attracted to other people doing their own healing work. When two people are committed to consciousness and growth, their shadows become opportunities for deeper intimacy rather than sources of conflict. Jung's ultimate insight about the shadow feminine was that it contains not just the potential for destruction, but also the seeds for the deepest transformation. Every shadow pattern, when healed and integrated, becomes a powerful gift. The devouring mother becomes the nurturing lover, a woman who can give and receive love without fear. The seductive destroyer becomes the empowered feminine, a woman who owns her power without needing to steal yours. The eternal victim becomes the wise woman, someone who has transformed her pain into wisdom and compassion. The false light becomes the authentic self, a woman who can be genuinely loving and wise without performance or pretense. But this transformation isn't something you can force or manipulate someone into. It's something that happens naturally when the right conditions are present: safety, truth, patience, and love without agenda. Jung's work reveals that the mystery of feminine psychology isn't something to be solved or conquered. It's something to be understood and honored. The shadow feminine isn't the enemy of love, it's love's greatest teacher. It shows us where healing is needed, where growth is possible, and where deeper intimacy can emerge. Understanding these patterns doesn't make you immune to them. It makes you conscious of them. And consciousness is the first step toward freedom. When you can see the patterns operating, you have a choice in how to respond. When you can understand the wounds behind the behaviors, you can respond with wisdom rather than reaction. The real power in Jung's insights isn't in using them to manipulate or control women. It's in using them to become the kind of person who naturally attracts healthy, integrated partners. When you do your own shadow work, when you heal your own wounds, when you become genuinely secure and centered in yourself, you stop attracting people operating from shadow patterns. This is Jung's ultimate gift to understanding relationships, the recognition that we attract what we are, not what we want. If you want to be in relationship with someone who has integrated their shadows, you must first integrate your own. The shadow feminine that Jung tried to reveal isn't something to fear or fix. It's something to understand and honor as part of the human experience. Every woman carries these patterns because every woman has been wounded by a world that often doesn't know how to love the feminine in healthy ways. Your journey into understanding the depths of feminine psychology doesn't end here. If you want to dive deeper into Jung's revolutionary insights about relationships, love, and the hidden forces that drive human behavior, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell. And if this video opened your eyes to patterns you've never seen before, leave a comment below sharing which shadow pattern you've encountered most in your relationships. Your story might help another person recognize their own patterns and begin their own healing journey. Remember, consciousness is the first step toward transformation, and transformation is the first step toward love.